you know what? Maybe I'm not quote changing the world with what I'm doing personally, but I'm working with companies that can change the world, and I can make my part of the world better because I'm working with good people to build great companies.
Welcome to Lone Startup. I'm your host, Pat Killoran, and on this show, we'll be talking to founders, CEOs, and creators who have built incredible businesses right here in our backyard of Austin. All right, I've got a confession to make, and I might as well come clean right here, right now. I am not a handyman. There, I said it. It's out there in the open for my wife and brother-in-law to chuckle about and nod in agreement. You'd think after multiple failed projects, ones I conveniently blame on our house being old and funky, that I'd finally admit it to myself. But nope. That is, until I talked to today's guest. Kurt Wilkin got me thinking about the power of being self-aware. Like really owning up to the things you're just not that great at, and how that can save you from letting your ego stall progress in your life. Kurt is an entrepreneur, author, dad to 3 boys, and by his own admission, a failed accountant. But here's the thing. Realizing he wasn't cut out for accounting opened the door to some truly incredible achievements. One of those was writing Who's Your Mike?, a business book I could not put down. And trust me, that's rare for me in business books. The book breaks down the different personalities you encounter in a company, characters like Pipeline Paul and Right Hand Rita, and how to strategically hire, manage, and sometimes, yes, fire the people around you. Kurt is also the host of one of my favorite podcasts called Unlocking Moves, where he breaks down the pivotal moments of leaders' lives that enable them to reach their full potential. And for Kurt, one of those moments happened very early on when he had the self-awareness to recognize what he was not good at.
I just realized that accounting and auditing and checking figures is not my bag.
Yeah.
Like, for example, you go out and you do an inventory. When the first year staff, they would go out at midnight on New Year's Eve and go count everything in a warehouse. You'd be there for 4 or 5 hours. And it had to be midnight because that's the drop, that's the deadline or the date of the balance sheet. And I would go in there, I'm like, there's a lot of screws or, whatever, a lot of microphones in that cabinet. They say there's 50. It kind of looks like 50. Sure, why not?
Yeah, a little guesstimate there.
And so I was at the best. And also in the audit world, you're pouring through these financial statements and you'd find issues, like something's wrong with them and I have to go investigate. And I realized early on, the more issues you found, the longer you had to work.
More work you had to do.
And so I was kind of like, I might not. I think it's okay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't the best auditor.
Yeah, that's a lot more hands-on than I was imagining. I was thinking just as an auditor, you're just behind a computer crunching numbers, but you're like really in their business, like counting inventory.
You are in their business and you're a first or second year person and you're not the most, the smartest tool in the shed. And so these 30-year CFOs they'll pull your wool over your eyes. They'll try to snow you. They know that you're not really that mature yet.
I want to quickly talk about the .com era where you jumped into more very early stage startups and you started to get really some great exposure to kind of building a company from the ground up. And some of them, the eFan shop in 1998 you joined as kind of employee number 3. When you look back on that era of the .com bubble that you were part of, like, what do you take away? What have you taken away from that that's like kind of guided you in a lot of different ways today? Are there some big lessons you learned during that phase of life that you still look back and say, I'm glad I went through that pain point or that issue because it helped me in certain ways?
I never look at things that I did and have a regret. And so I always look at it as an opportunity. What did I learn? And so what can I carry with me? So I like your question. With eFan Shop, it was a .com. It was in licensed sports products. I always had an entrepreneurial gene. I wanted to do something more than just, audit for a CPA firm. And so when that opportunity came up, I jumped at it. And it was very early stage. I was an early employee. I did learn a lot for sure. And I learned maybe a lot of what not to do. That's a lot of the lessons I've learned is just what not to do. Mm-hmm. Of course, you learn some things what to do as well. But the thing that maybe one of the big lessons there to your point is by the time everybody's chasing the rainbow, it might be too late. Like Bitcoin a few years ago or AI even now, right? Like is this just everybody chasing $1 or is it legit?
Yeah.
And is it something that we can either monetize or make money from or just get experience with? Or Is it just a passing fad? And I
Yeah.
know it's AI, and even the .com is not a passing fad, but the way it came out and went like the bubble burst
Yeah.
was a little bit faddish.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point because even myself, when you see these trends take off, part of you wants to jump on the wave, right? It's like the AI wave or the Web3 wave. And I did myself in the Web3 in a way. I kind of jumped on that. And then you have to always come back to, well, am I really even that excited about it? Am I that passionate about it? Or am I just going where the herd's going on that trend because that's just where there's a lot of shiny objects? And I think you have to kind of balance that because if you're just doing it for that reason, long term, it's probably not going to be right for you, right? Okay, and so then from there, you after the dot-com bubble basically burst, right? It sounds like you kind of were in a spot where you had to figure out how to have money coming in the door. And is that basically the birth of the Controller Group, the company that you essentially started?
It is. So one last thing on the .com. I
Yeah.
remember we were in the sports industry right after Mark Cuban sold broadcast.com to Yahoo Sports for, $1 billion or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Right after he sold, he came out and said how bad the .com bubble was going to burst.
Really?
And we're like, dude, can you wait till I get my
Yeah.
my broadcast before you? So I'm not a
Jeez.
big fan of his for
Yeah.
that reason. But he was right, but he made sure he got his money before he cast a spell.
Yeah.
So I had a young baby, like a 3-month-old, and a new wife, within the last year and a half or so. And so yeah, I had to make ends meet, and so I went back for a bad accountant who's not good at what he's doing. I got lucky and had a friend who connected me with a client who had some needs in accounting, and I'm
Mhm.
smart enough to do the job. It's not a passion, but I had a project that I had more work than I could handle, and I had people around me that were a lot smarter than me that I could bring in and do the work, and that was
Mhm.
really the impetus for the Controller Group, which became my first real like true entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yeah.
And over the course of a 5-year period, we grew to about 120 professionals and 20 million or so in revenue. So it was a
Wow.
wild ride. And the lesson learned, which you haven't asked me yet, is surrounded myself with people that are smarter than me.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew what my gift was. My gift was not accounting. So my gift was business development and relationships and solving big problems.
Yeah.
And then having the team come in and do the detail work.
Yeah. That's amazing. At TCG, at the Controller Group, you had a few breaks go your way. Are there any big ones that you can remember that were interesting, kind of, or lucky, fortunate events that happened there?
Yeah, I think anytime you have success, you have big breaks, and that's where my podcast, Unlocking Moves, comes in.
Mhm.
These things that you used to take advantage of. The first big one was I was able to sell a financial statement restructure with a company called they were called Network Associates, which became McAfee, and they had to restate their financial statements because of basically fraud years prior. And it was about a 1-year engagement, and I went up there to help my partners do the work. It was a big boon for us. We made a lot of money and really set us up for success. And then the next one was right as that was winding down, there was a congressional act called Sarbanes-Oxley, which came out.
Mm-hmm.
Sarbanes-Oxley are the name of the 2 senators that created the act. It was basically after Enron, how do we give the American people the confidence that the financial statements are accurate? So we created an act to basically make sure that internal controls were good.
Mm-hmm.
And so my partners were very good at internal controls. I was not, but I was good at helping sell it. And so that was a big win for us, is that congressional act. The other thing it's a hidden win, was we were selling to Network Associates, we were selling them a Sarbanes-Oxley project, which would have been a couple $1 million over the course of a year, a big project for us. And we lost it. We lost it actually to a guy that I brought in to help me with the project we were working on before. So this guy kind of stabbed me in the back a bit.
Yeah.
But looking back, it was great because they were a very hard client to work with, and all of our resources would have been dedicated to this one client.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically their firm kind of petered out after that project ended. We, on the other hand, had to go sell other projects. So we sold a big project to Hager, the clothes store up in Dallas, clothes manufacturer. We sold a big project to Southwest Airlines. We sold a big project to a large called Crescent Realty, which was a real estate investment trust company up there. And so we were able to diversify.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in hindsight, it was a gift that we lost it. And I think that's how I like to look at things.
Definitely.
I have a lot of, just a quick segue, I have a lot of work, do a lot of work with executives in transition. We talked about that before we started recording. And I tell them the fact that you were either let go or your company got sold or that you left on your own accord, whatever, this is a gift. How can you now reinvent yourself, or what do you need to be doing next? And that you couldn't have done before because you were tied up with this other opportunity. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, totally. Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I think even early in your career, it seems like you were pretty self-aware of your own skill set and like where you needed help, right? And like, and what people to bring in. And um, I think that's such an important quality to have in general, no matter what position, whether you're a CEO or coming in as an intern. Self-awareness, I think, is a big part of understanding the team dynamics and how you fit into the larger mix, right? Do you think that's something that can be easily taught? Like, have you seen that when you come across an entrepreneur or a leader who maybe isn't super self-aware of their role and what they're good at? Is that something that you can kind of turn somebody around on if you give them the right pointers, or is that sort of a more of something natural skill set people have?
So your question is around how do you encourage people to be more self-aware? Let me answer it this way, which is the way I initially started hearing your question, was how do you lean into your gifts? How do you encourage people to lean into their gifts?
Yeah.
So for me, I think it was just the struggles of not being a detail-oriented accountant that I realized what I wasn't good at. And at the time, there were a lot of leadership books saying, how do you make a strength out of a weakness and lean into your weakness, make it better? And I felt differently. I want to make my strengths better. How
Hmm.
do I really make that pop and be really, really good at what I'm gifted at? And I think I was just lucky. I don't know that I really studied it. It just happened. And I contrast that with my dad, we talked about earlier, was a struggling accountant. He wanted to do everything himself. And so he became a landlord. So he's out there nailing boards and painting walls when he could have paid somebody at the time, $20 an hour to do it,
Hmm.
instead of him wasting his valuable time that he could be selling the next project. And again, I don't know that I recognized it at the time, but in hindsight, that was his struggle as an entrepreneur, was
Hmm.
trying to do everything himself. And I was just fortunate that I had these great partners that were really good at that detail work.
Yeah.
So the reason I answered it that way is because I want people to see themselves in that story.
Yeah.
What are you gifted at that you could really lean into, that gives you flow, that makes you happy, that you're good at and the world needs, versus what are the things that are needed but you're not good at? And so I think the more you can understand that, the more self-aware you can become. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't
No,
think
I
you can
think
quote teach self-awareness. I think people need to see it for themselves or hear it in other people's stories.
Yeah. No, I think that was a great answer in terms of how do you identify what you're good at, because that is going to help you be more self-aware. Just knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, that exercise alone is kind of building self-awareness. And I think that's a great lesson. And you again had to go through this process yourself when you ended up selling the controller group, right? And you had a big sale to Tatum, right? Is that
Yep.
correct? Well, you had a period where you were kind of rethinking what you wanted to do next, right? Can you talk a little bit about that time in your life and kind of how uh, what that next transition period looked like for you?
Yeah. So the advice I give people now when that happens is take plenty of time. Don't be in a rush. Spend at least a year trying to figure, who you want to be and what your next step is. At the time, I, I joke. I fired off a Jerry Maguire letter. If you're familiar with Jerry Maguire,
Oh
Show Me
yeah.
the Money, where I'm going to change the world and here's what I'm going to do. And I hadn't really thought it through.
Hmm.
And I also had 3 young boys at home and a wife at home, and I had, both of my parents passed,
Mm.
and the company that I had sold over the course of the 3 years I was at the new company had been basically dismantled. So my proverbial baby, my company had been all the things I had built, and I was kind of, my identity was now gone. My parents, huge emotional, just roller coaster of parents passing. My mom suddenly, my dad a little bit longer, but
Mm.
still, I'm kind of 35 years old, and both my parents passed, and it's just a traumatic period.
Yeah, I
So I
can't
went
imagine.
through definitely a desert at the time,
Hmm.
and professionally, what do I want to do? The advice I would give now is to take your time and lean into that versus knee jerk and do something else.
Yeah.
I got it. I went a little bit too quick.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I saw one of your podcasts. You kind of started jumping into maybe some tech companies you might wanted to buy, and then you started getting excited about some pretty big, lofty, change in the world type projects, but then quickly realized, maybe that's not my fit, right? So you kind of stayed away from the tech ideas, and then you found Higher Better, which was already an existing company, right?
Yeah. Before that, I started doing consulting around this kind of make money and do good.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to large businesses and like, how can I help you save money? Can I replace your light bulbs to more energy efficient? So you're going to save money and you're doing the good for the environment. And I loved it, but I wasn't strong enough technically. And so I was going to get myself over my skis pretty quick.
Yeah.
And then I did stumble upon Higher Better. And I love the mindset. They did things differently than most recruiters. I think the recruiting industry is broken. And so I talked myself into, you know what? Maybe I'm not quote changing the world with what I'm doing personally, but I'm working with companies that can change the world, and I can make my part of the world better because I'm working with good people to build great companies.
So when you bought Higher Better, what was the current, like, how big was it? Like, who was in charge? Like, what was it, a difficult transition kind of buying that company? What did that look like?
So before Higher Better, I started my Jerry Maguire letter was business earth. I want to do great by, I want to take the best ideas of the tree hugging left is what I would say. And then I want to marry them up with the capitalist pigs, money mongering whores to make the world a better place and pay for it. And so I wanted to do three things. I wanted to encourage people and educate them that you can make money and do good. I wanted to invest in companies I felt met this mantra. And then lastly, I wanted to put my time in I had a small team that I'd kind of taken from Tatum that was going to go with me to do this. And so that's what we ended up doing with Higher Better is my partner, Melinda Owens, joined me. And we had a couple people from Tatum that joined us as well. Melinda worked for at least a year unpaid, working with me to identify the right company to buy. And Higher Better was going to be I was going to be the chairman. She was going to be the CEO. The founder was going to stick around, and I was going to be a passive investor. Within a few months, it became obvious that the founder was unemployable. I love him, but he's Jonathan Davis. And he would probably agree with that. And so I stepped in more on a full-time basis, and before you knew it, I'm sucked in, and I'm basically running it with Melinda. So it was more than I wanted it to be, but
yeah. And how much because I love, I've been doing obviously a lot of research on Higher Better, and I love your overall philosophy on how you help companies navigate strategic hiring and team dynamic decisions. Was a lot of that foundation in place, or did you have to kind of come in and bring some additional processes and ways of thinking about your business model to Higher Better?
A bit of both. So the recruiting industry is built on filling empty chairs. There's an empty seat around the table. They want to fill it fast, and people are judged on how fast you can fill it and how cheap. And you got to hire fast and very reactive. And I'm coming at it from a business perspective. Like, as a business, do I want fast or do I want good? Like, how can I do this better? And so I stole a bunch of concepts, which are now in the book, but there's a bunch of thought leaders out there in the middle market. Vern Harnish has a book called Rockefeller Habits. The Good to Great, Jim Collins. There's a lot of things around EOS and traction, which is Gino Wickman. And I took some of these concepts and said, the way that we're hiring is reactive. How can we make it more strategic? Take a step back. So that's the impetus for a lot of what Higher Better is now, is based on, let's take a business first approach. How are we going to make your company better, not just fill a seat as fast as we can? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I want to peel that back even a little more to get in there, because I think it's such an interesting way to go about, helping a company navigate key hires, because especially, I've been at a lot of early stage startups and I know how important hiring is. How do you enable a CEO, or an executive team to actually be vulnerable enough with you to let you guys in on what's really the pain point, what really, what the team dynamic is like, right? Because I feel like a lot of times you hire a recruiting company, you tell them, sure, your KPIs, here's our goals. We need to hire a salesperson. We're trying to get to this ARR, whatever. And it's a lot of business jargon, but you miss the whole boat on like some of the core, maybe cultural issues going on. How do you guys tackle the cultural side of a business to really be strategic about who you really need from a personality standpoint, not just a numbers, this guy checks this box? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's probably the main reason why we're not a multi-million, $100 million nationwide international company. While we are international, we are nationwide and we're sizable. We haven't scaled because what we do probably doesn't scale. We need to work with decision makers. Most of our work comes from the entrepreneur themselves or the board, perhaps. If you're a HR manager and you call us, we're probably not going to work with you because most of them, with all due respect, are not strategic enough to have those types of conversations. They're given an edict and a checklist and they got to go do it. And so that's where it starts. And there's a lot of founders, especially venture-backed. In Austin, we got the tech bro scene. They're the smartest people in the room, and pardon my French, their shit doesn't stink. They don't listen to counsel. So that is a whole nother crew that's not going to work with us. It's people that are humble enough and have the humility and that they're able to see that maybe they're not perfect and they're willing to listen to counsel. And then my approach, as you've probably seen, is I want to share with you my warts and stumbles and mistakes so that you're okay opening up about yours.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest thing for us when we're working with these companies. And my team now, especially the ones who've been around for a while with us, they take the same approach.
Yeah.
And so you'd be amazed at what people share with us as a recruiting firm.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from we might sell the company to I'm going through a divorce to all kinds of crazy real life issues that happen. And all of that allows us to be a better partner to our clients. And that's where the gift is. We can help you and you're honest with us about your challenges. So now we can help you solve it.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I was wondering about who your sweet spot of kind of clients would be. And it makes sense that maybe the smartest guys in the room, tech founders, might not fit exactly your model because you do need somebody that can meet you in the middle and be pretty, like you're saying, kind of vulnerable about everything going on and want to receive that feedback is probably the biggest key to you guys being able to do what you do really well. And I want to get to the book in just a second here. I guess the last question I have in terms of hiring, is there a key hire that you see it's often overlooked by early stage founders where, sometimes you have we need a sales guy, we need a marketing person, we need a, product manager. Have you noticed that maybe a couple roles where people don't really think about it until too late and then there's a lot of cleanup? I know it's a big question. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but are there any, if the founder's listening right now and he thinks he has all the boxes checked on the key roles they need, the 10-person team to start scaling, are there a couple roles you'd be like, hey, you might want to start thinking about this type of person a little bit earlier than you think to help the business run smoothly? Does anything come to mind there?
Yeah. So let me give you a general answer, then maybe more specific. The general answer is early on, you need generalists, people that can do a lot of different things and they wear a lot of different hats and they just get stuff done. They work their ass off. They're very loyal to you. And that's just the early stage company. As you mature, you're going to need specialists. And that's a lot of what the book's about, is evolving from that generalist team to more of a specialist team. But early on, there's the character in my book is called Right Hand Rita. But this is a person that is your right hand. They do most founders have a gift with vision, or they're very good at sales, or they're very good with product. There's something that they're good at that's generally big picture. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, they're not very good with details. And all the stuff that has to happen. I tell people I can inspire the team to charge the hill, but I'm not detailed enough to say, okay, in order to climb that hill, we need to, leave at noon or dawn. And we need to, here's all the checklists of all the things we need. And by the way, Pat, here's your role and responsibility. And Kurt, here's your role and responsibility. That's not me, but I need people around me that can do that. So Right Hand Rita is that character that is just the detail oriented, get stuff done, project manager, very solid with the details.
Yeah.
And if you work hand in glove with the founder that is more visionary, it can be really good.
Yeah.
At some point, you might outgrow Rita in that role, which is another part of the story.
Yeah. So let's get into the book, because I love the book. At what point did you start writing this book? And what prompted that? Was it just kind of the conversations you were having naturally with your clients? Kind of, you were like, okay, I'm repeating a lot of these analogies and examples. Might as well throw this into a book, or how did that come about?
That's the main reason, is I'd have conversations with somebody like you over the coffee table or the lunch room or whatever, and your eyes would light up. It's like, yeah, it's exactly my situation. I know you see me. Were you in my boardroom? Because you're repeating things. And so that happens a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
so I decided, let's take some of these stories and share them with a broader audience so that it can reach more, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
more
Yeah.
than just the one-on-one. Now, a little bit more about that story is, I know if your audience is anything like me, they're thinking, "Oh, crap, another business book. I don't need another business book." And that's my perspective very much. And so I've got a lot of partially read business books on my nightstand because I honestly get bored with them.
Same.
But here's what I learned, and this is the problem with business books, and it's in the book, so you know this already, but everybody has a good idea, and there's some really good fodder in there for an idea or a book, but there's not enough for a 200-page book.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you'll do is there's like one or two really good nuggets like, "Man, I wanna take that home." Even like good to great and try, I mean, there's good things in there, but not enough for a whole book.
Yep.
But they can't sell a short story. You gotta
Right.
sell a book. And so that's my problem with business books is there's 20% that's golden and there's 80% just bullshit fluff.
Yeah.
And so I didn't wanna do that. And so when I said, "I wanna write a book to share my story," and one of my employees at the time said, "Kurt, you're so good at networking and connecting and bringing people together. Why don't you write a book about that? I would buy that
Mm.
all day long." And I'm like, "Dude, my problem is I only have 40 pages of that. I don't have 200 pages of that." And so a couple years prior, I had written this blog article called "Who's Your Mike?"
Mm-hmm.
which, spoiler alert, it's obviously the name of the book, but the story was about an early stage employee that you had who was your right hand reader, perhaps, who becomes your bookkeeper. You promote them to be accountant, and then you promote him to be your controller, and then you promote him to be your CFO because all these things are just part of the process, and titles are cheap. Where you look up one day and you've outgrown Mike, and he's doing things he's never done before, and you're a real company, and Mike has no idea what he's doing. So the question of the article and the book is, "Who's your Mike?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what if I wrote a book about different characters that you've had in your journey? And I went on a hike with a buddy of mine, Carl Nattenstedt, and we were 5 days in the Appalachian Trail, and we started this just brainstorming. Hey, what about Paul? What about this guy that's all bullshit? He's
Pipeline
got this,
Paul.
yeah, he's got this. He talks about all these great things in his pipeline because he's a sales guy, but nothing ever seems to matriculate through the pipeline. So it was just a blast going through that,
Yeah.
and that was where I figured I kind of need to write this.
Right.
So I had a guy who was helping me with my brand. His name is Rod Kurtz. He's mentioned in the book too. And then my nephew, Evan Spencer, he's an archivist, so basically a glorified librarian, but he's a hell of a writer.
Oh wow.
And what I found is when I write by myself, I don't know if you've tried to write a book or not, but when I write by myself, I'm a perfectionist. So I
Mm-hmm.
try to edit it when I write.
Mm.
The problem when you do that is you never get going,
Yeah.
and it's just hard to write a full chapter. So what I learned was we had every Tuesday, we would have a call, the three of us, and I would think, I'm thinking about a accounting character. And, Mike would kind of come
Mm-hmm.
to life. And then Rod would ask me questions. I'm like, yeah, I think he's at this, and this. And we would record the calls, and Evan would take notes. And Evan is good at structure.
Mm-hmm.
And when I write again, I try to make it perfect so my structure is all over the place. And so he would basically take the topic and put it into structure form.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in and I changed pretty much every word, but he gave me a base to work from. So he kind of
Oh,
was
that's
my
cool. That's great.
ghostwriter. So I think COVID was a gift because we had nothing else to do, on
Yeah.
many of those nights. And and
That's
that's really where it all came about.
Yeah. I mean, it's another good example of you asking for help, right? And kind of knowing where your strengths are and kind of bringing in people to help you there. Because writing that book on your own would have been probably a tall order.
I would have lost patience. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, so before we dive deeper into Kurt's book, I wanted to emphasize how unprecedented it is that a recruiting company truly cares about the long term success of a company. So much so that it's willing to forego becoming a much bigger company because their mission to tap into the true emotions and pain points of a company simply doesn't scale. But in things that don't scale, you can often find incredible value. I also came to find out that Kurt is helping providing value to founders in another big way through his role at Bee Cave Capital. He's a partner over there and he's investing in a ton of locally owned awesome businesses. You may have heard of a little boot company called Tecovas that has blown up over the past few years. Kurt was the first Austin Czech to invest in them before anyone else here in Austin had faith in what he was trying to build over there. So if you're an entrepreneur looking for smart investors that not only want to give you capital, but want to help you hire the right team around you, I highly encourage you to check out what Kurt and his team are doing over there at Bee Cave. This is not an ad. This is just something I wanted to bring attention to because I think it's incredible to have this really unique kind of 1-2 punch with not only just capital, but then finding the right people to build a team. Okay, let's get back to the show and into my new favorite business book. But the thing I love about the book is that same thing. I've bought in a lot of business books at the airport that I never actually read. I get 20 pages in, fall asleep in the airplane, never open it again. But your book opens up with such a accessible tone, right? It's like I feel like we're just like talking over coffee, and you're just laying on me a bunch of wisdom from your past, and it's so easy to digest. It doesn't feel preachy, doesn't feel too buzzwordy, and so I commend you. I love the overall tone. I read it super quick once I finally got healthy and was able to take a few hours, and I probably read it in 3-4 days, the whole book. But I love, there was a quote in here, and you kind of already hit on this, but you say, just because someone helped you get to where you are today doesn't necessarily mean they're the right leader to take you where you want to go. And I think that's so powerful for leaders and founders to constantly think about with their whole team of, okay, we had the right people on the bus here, but now we're taking a right turn and this bus needs to be rearranged a little bit.
Yeah.
And you kind of, there's kind of basically three options when you think that your mic isn't maybe the guy to take you to the next phase, right? You can either invest in them, which you talk about in the book, where that can be a good option, but it can also you might sacrifice some precious time. You might be at a point in the company where you need to hit on the gas. You need the person there now. You don't have the time to bring in the coaching or do it yourself, right? You can reposition them in a different role, but again, you talk about there can be a touchy situation there where they might feel a little slighted and offended that you put them in maybe a different role, or you can let them go, which is probably the hardest, most confrontational decision, right? And I can think of 2 or 3 different examples where I've had to think about this, and even me myself being on the other end of that, I knew I was kind of in that
Yep.
that stage, right? And it's tough because no one likes confrontation. It's really challenging, especially when you've developed such a relationship with these people that have helped you grow the business. What are some of the things to consider when you're going through those 3 options as a founder? Like, can you talk a little bit about that thought process that you tell leaders to think about when they have a mic, and here's the 3 options, but here's what you need to think about to get to the best answer?
Yep. So I'm going to answer your question with 2 other questions before I get to that one.
Perfect. Yeah.
Because just big picture, what a lot of entrepreneurs may not realize is you've got a leadership team of, say, 5 people, and you as a leader, especially a first-time founder, you're going through this for the first time, so you're learning a lot of lessons. If you've got 5 other people on your team all doing this for the first time, to your point earlier, you're going to learn a lot of lessons the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's definitely a way to do it, and many companies have been successful over the long haul, if you want to get there faster, let's find a couple of people on the team who've done this before, and we can learn from their previous warts and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece of counsel. The other piece is before I can have that conversation with Mike, I want to understand: do I have a mic? Like what are the options there? And in my book, there's a chapter. The way it's written, as you know, is there's characters, and every chapter is a different character or archetype. And then I did these, I call them intermissions, but they're basically the advice chapters
Mm-hmm.
about each genre. So the first one is legacy employees, and then there's a advice chapter, intermission 1, about assessing your team. There's 3 chapters about new people you bring in. So then there's an intermission about recruiting. So in that first intermission 1, there's 3 questions I like to ask that are very, very core to really the foundation for entrepreneurs to know.
Yeah.
And these are, I think they're stolen from, again, Vern Harnish and these other thought leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, knowing today what you know about your organization and where you're going, would you enthusiastically rehire Mike, in this example, for his current role?
Mm-hmm.
Enthusiastically rehire him for the same role. So maybe he's your CFO and he got you to $5 million in revenue, but now you have eyes on $20 million in revenue. Is Mike your CFO, your finance leader? Yes or no? More often than not, it's no.
Yeah.
The next question is, does Mike have the skills, experience, and tools to get us to the next level, whatever that level is? So 20 million.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely doesn't have the experience. He's doing this for the first time. Does he have the skill set? Is he able to learn? Is he willing to learn? Is he open minded? Is he curious? All the things that come into making someone a next level employee.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a yes or no. The next two are more, I call them gut questions, but basically, what if I had a team full of Mike? Like all six of my leaders or all 30 of my employees were Mikes.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, you're like, well, Mike's really, solid in certain ways, but having 30 of them, probably, maybe not a good fit.
Yeah.
And then what if Mike were to come into my office tomorrow and quit? And that's a good gut check. At first, most people are going to be a panic because they rely on Mike for a lot of things. But then if they really stop and think about it, they're like, huh, that might be an easy fix.
Yeah.
Can I get him to quit? And so those are four questions that are pretty good to ask and really understand if you've got one of these Mike issues, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, I'll answer your question. So is Mike part of your problem or is he part of your solution? And so you've already determined he's part of your problem, right? So, but can he be fixed? Can he grow with you? So ask yourself questions like, is Mike open to learn? Is he willing to take feedback? Is he willing to, can we bring in a coach and work with him? Is he so hard headed that he would take that, his ego would take a hit and he would be, no, I can do it. Or yeah, I don't need this coaching, whatever it is. And do you think your relationship is strong enough that you can have that conversation?
Mhm.
And I hope it is. But a lot of founders don't like to have those hard conversations, like you said, including
Yeah.
myself. Look, I suck at this.
Yeah.
But the longer I've gone, the more I've been able to maybe have some of these honest conversations with people that say, hey, man, we need to work on this. And by the way, I'm also looking myself in the mirror. I have my own challenges and I'm willing to go get coaching myself.
Yeah.
So those are all part of the equation.
Yeah, no, I love that advice, and I think as I was reading the book and a lot of your advice, at the end of each section on how to handle these different situations, at the core of it, to make a lot of these decisions easier, is having an open communication and a trust, and establishing trust with each other early on, right? So if you hadn't really built any rapport with the key person that you're making this decision about their fate on, it's going to be a lot more difficult if you don't have a relationship with them, if you don't really have much of a mutual trust with each other. That's going to make the decision a lot harder because then you're just kind of going off of the quantitative stuff they're doing and not really the qualitative soft skills that they have. And so much comes back to, as a leader, being really good at being able to have a good, solid foundation with, as many people as you can at your company. I know it's probably hard, but especially your leaders and the people that are really kind of leading the charge at your company. And so I obviously encourage people to read this, especially if really, I mean, you don't even have to be, in my opinion, an executive or CEO. Like if you're just a role player at a company, this is a great book. I think this is going to be a really good insight into how people think about building a team, what their role is, how the team dynamics, fit, how to build your dream team, as you talk about. And in building your dream team, I love the sports analogies in the book, by the way. I love the Bulls. I was a big fan of the NBA in the 90s. So I was a big Orlando Magic fan. So the Bulls were my enemy at the time. But you talk a lot about how they did such a good job utilizing their B players. And as much as I love all the profiles on, Side Hustle Sam, Pipeline Paul, those were great. Spoke to me in a lot of ways with my sales experience. I loved having a chapter dedicated to the B players and how to navigate that. It's not talked about enough because, as you point out, not every company has the cash to just hire A players. And so you're going to have a diverse group of people all trying to move the ship in the same direction. And you need that balance. A bunch of A players, I've seen it, causes a lot of friction, right?
Yep.
And so, but there's a situation that arises, and I want to get your thoughts and expand upon it a little bit, where you have a B player who knows the product really well, or whatever you're selling, right? They've been there, everyone likes them, they're solid at their job, they do a great job, they're not a huge outstanding performer, but they come in and they do what's asked, right? Eventually, sometimes they will raise their hand and say, hey, Kurt, I'd love to get a seat at the table. I'd love to move into a leadership position. I feel like I've kind of earned my stripes here. What are the chances I can kind of get into this role? And I have a lot of empathy for B players. I've seen them, how important they are in a company's culture. And I've had the situation happen where, I've had to think about whether I can elevate that B player into a more leadership type role. What do you have to kind of think about there? Because I know you talk about how as much as you want to quickly rewards B players and try to help them, you also have to be very careful about where you position those people.
Yep. So I'm a pleaser, and a friend of mine just actually said, "No, you're a peacekeeper. You're not a pleaser." But the idea is that people come to me with something, and I'm like, "Yeah, let's give it a shot," and that's not the right answer. "Hey, Pat, yeah, sure. Why not take that CFO role? I think you can do it. Let's go," or whatever. Even if I have doubts, that's not the right answer. The right answer is to really. It's a big deal, especially if you're growing really rapidly. The 20% growth might not seem like that much, but compounded year after year after year, you're going to start feeling like your wheels are falling off the bus.
Hmm.
And so and I'll use my name for as an example versus I won't pick on Pat, but if Kurt, if I think he's going to struggle in that next role, let's have a real honest conversation about it. And even if I don't know if he's going to struggle, let's really have an honest conversation about it because I don't want to set him up for failure.
Hmm.
I don't want because now I've probably losing the employee that I had in that role, that whatever role he was leaving, and I probably have a really crappy manager now if he's moving up into a management role or a leadership
Hmm.
role. And so I want to be honest about what I think his capabilities are, and then if I've got a good enough rapport and we can have this discussion that says, "Yeah, man, I want you to be a leader. I want you to grow in your career. I want you to be a CEO later. I just can't do it now for my company."
Hmm.
So why don't I bring in you want to be a COO? Why don't I bring in a fractional COO, chief operating officer, to play that role and you can learn from. And
Hmm.
maybe in a year you can ascend into that role. Let's assess it at the time. Or maybe you've learned enough where you can go be a COO for someone else.
Hmm.
That's the world. It's a very exciting world. If I can create the next leaders for other organizations, I know it feels it's going to hurt when you leave, but
Hmm.
you probably needed to spread your wings, and I probably needed to bring in some fresh blood. So there's a whole dichotomy there that's happening during that process.
To kind of wrap up, the book, you also talk about the very end, where sometimes the CEO themselves can be the problem, right? And I want to talk about, because I'm not suggesting that you were the problem ever, but there is you've also had the self awareness in your own career to take a step back and say, hey, maybe this I'm not the right person to kind of keep this company going at this trajectory, or I have other things I'd like to focus on. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that transpired at Higher Better? Because you now have kind of taken on a different role where you're doing things that maybe speak to you, or you want to spend your time and energy a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit about that thought process?
Yeah. So I'll remind you that at Higher Better, I was never supposed to run it. I was going to
Hmm.
have some other people run it, and then I looked up 10 years later, and I'm running it. And there was definitely an awareness there. And I've seen enough clients where they ask us to go recruit great employees, and there's a lot of times where we go recruit the best employee that we think can possibly be, and then within 6 or 12 months, it doesn't work out.
Hmm.
And so the client's pissed, "Hey, so and so didn't work out. Go find me another one." And we do a little bit of assessment, and we're like, "Well, maybe I think you're the problem." Right? We can't bring in a great employee into a really crappy, chaotic atmosphere that you're micromanaging and all the things that entrepreneurs can do. And so I think all of that combines into my epilogue for the book is called When You're the Problem,
Hmm.
which was an article I wrote a few years ago. And there's so many great stories I've got of just clients and myself too, that we get in the way. I've got really good strengths and I, as you said earlier, I'm self-aware enough to know where my weaknesses are. And I think that was part of it for me is I wanted to be able to do the things that I really enjoy doing,
Hmm.
whether it's meeting entrepreneurs and helping them solve their problems in other ways. There's so many things we do for clients that we don't get paid for. We've got an whole ecosystem around us that I can refer into, like these guys today. What's the name of the podcast studio?
Muted Studios.
Muted
Yeah.
Studios. Now I've got a friend, a place I can refer people to go do their podcasts,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to get paid for that, and that's okay. I'm solving their problem. We do that for clients all the time. And if I'm the chief sales officer of Higher Better, I can't do that. I've got to find how somehow I'm going to sell Pat some business.
Yeah.
But if I'm in my flow, I can help Pat in other ways that I don't get paid for.
Yeah.
And that's just for me, it's much more fulfilling than
I'm sure.
filling a quota.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Kurt, I think that's it, man. I appreciate it so much. It's been so fun talking to you. I love your trajectory and just how it's always come back to being aware of your role, what you're good at, and leaning into that and letting the chips fall from there. I think that's such a great lesson for everybody to take away. So
I appreciate that, Pat. And I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast, bringing some awareness to local Austin businesses and entrepreneurs. It's really a great story. Thank you very
yeah,
much.
of course. Absolutely. Great to have you on. All right, thanks for listening. And like Kurt said, this podcast is built brick by brick by the stories of Austin founders who are shaping our city's economy. And honestly, I love it. I get to meet incredible people, hear their journeys, and walk away more inspired every single time. It's also made me way more intentional about where I spend my money, whether it's at local coffee shops, local bookstores, and restaurants. The more awesome businesses I get to know, the more I want to see them win. So buy local, invest local, and keep listening local. Let's give these businesses the spotlight they deserve. I'm your host, Pat Kaloran, and you're listening to Lone Startup.